Shang-Chi, Master of the Rings, has dropped, and he is one of the weirdest cards I have ever had the displeasure of playing with in Marvel Snap. So first things first, he's functionally 3 cards. The base Shang-Chi is a 3/5 with a game start effect. The game start effect puts the rings into your opening hand, where they will take up a draw, meaning you are effectively playing with about a 13 card deck instead of a 12 card deck. The Shang-Chi card itself has an on reveal that upgrades the rings. Base Rings is a pretty bad card, a 2/1 with an on reveal that buffs another card here. To me, if this card is going to improve in the future, it will largely be in making the base rings better. When they were data mined, they were completely broken. They were doing this at the end of every turn. That is a dramatically better thing than doing it once and needing a target. That is no longer the case, and it has hurt Shang-Chi dramatically. The upgraded rings are quite good. A 2/2 with an end of turn that buffs every card at the location other than the rings repeatedly. That's really good. This is a really powerful card when you are able to actually play the card Shang-Chi alongside the rings. Directionally, I think that's like the correct way to design a card like this. You don't want all of the power being in the base card you get for free and not actually have any of it involved in playing the card Shang-Chi. They got the direction right. They just chopped a little bit too much off this guy in order to get the direction right. And largely what that means is that fundamentally this is a card that wants you to draw Shang-Chi while also making it less likely for you to draw Shang-Chi. If I had to pick a card this reminded me of the most, I would say it reminded me of like if Spider-Man Noir was actually good when it worked. Like, that's the biggest thing about this, is it's easier to make this guy good than it is with Spider-Man Noir, because it's really simple, right? If you have a Clea and you have a Shang-Chi, you have a snap condition. It is genuinely that straightforwardly simple. You're just not very likely to actually make that happen. But I do think that while this guy is kind of mediocre, there is a lot of risk in making him a lot stronger, because I was able to play with him and climb, and I didn't feel like it was that far behind, except against the clear outlier that is Shou-Lao. This is kind of like almost a real thing. I realize the card is not great, but it does do some stuff that is just like, oh wow, that's really scary. Like, I've had games where my opponent is playing Shou-Lao, but I have Clea and the Shang-Chi in my hand, and so I'm just snapping because I'm going to beat them by doing that. It just is going to happen. And it's like, oh, you know, this card does do some strong stuff. You just don't do it very often because of the natural inconsistency it introduces into your deck. But there are some real synergies here. Clea is obviously the biggest one, but stuff like Superior Spider-Man is pretty interesting with this guy too. There's obviously some ways to play him as the domino in your Wiccan deck because the rings is a 2 cost. All of that kind of stuff does exist. It's just we're not in a very good metagame for doing this kind of finicky medium stuff, and you're kind of giving up a lot to make it happen. So with that said, let's jump into some decks. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. I'm just happy I remembered to remind you in the first 5 minutes of the video this time instead of at the very end. Thank you so much. Let's take a look at some decks. One of the lists that I played that I liked the most was this one from Ika, which I honestly found incredibly weirdly compelling. And I'm sure that has nothing to do with the fact that there's a Shou-Lao in here. I'm sure that has absolutely nothing to do with why I found this deck weirdly compelling. But honestly, like the werewolf, Clea, all of these procs kind of thing is kind of nice with it. Joaquin Torres is also kind of nice with it. Like, this is a deck that genuinely will snap on some free Clea procs. It's just, you could also probably be playing like Blue Marvel type things and other things in the space in order to make sure that this deck does what it needs to do. It's not like Shang-Chi is adding the most amount to it, but I felt really rewarded when I was able to actually play a Shang on 3. The problem is it also stacks though, because you really want to do that, but if you ever miss something early, and this is the biggest problem that this card has, is if you miss a 1-drop, or even if you draw it a turn late, you are so far behind the 8-ball. You need to go Clea into rings into other stuff. You don't have the option of doing that later. It just doesn't actually work, right? it is very difficult to play if you get even minorly disrupted, which is really bad news because minorly disrupted is basically the name of the game for show loud decks right now. They're playing Iceman, they're playing Spider-Ham. A lot of minor disruption is happening to you. And so this is a deck that has a bunch of cool things going for it, but ultimately I think ends up falling short to the true terror of the metagame, which is just show loud decks that are leaning into being a show loud deck. But I was honestly surprised at, like, if we are playing a mirror, I do get to snap when I have Clea. Like, that is actually just a thing I get to do with the way this deck is put together. It's not what I expected. Clea is genuinely the single best card to play with this card. Like, it is actually kind of shocking to me just how good that is. And I expected it to be good, but it is like really, really good. It is doing some legitimately ridiculous things when it happens, especially with a Joaquin Torres making the -6s. You do some really crazy stuff. It is really strong. There is a lot of negative power applied, and that can be really valuable in a world where your opponents are doing show loud stuff with cards that sit on the board, like Maverick and, of course, Scarlet Spider. The problem is their disruption is actually what gets you when you play against them, and this deck is a little bit fragile to that. Another list I played that I particularly enjoyed was one that Zenaid put together. This is kind of a Zenaid special. He's been messing around with, like, what I guess you would reasonably call Viv Vision tempo for a while now, and Shang is honestly pretty great at doing what this deck is asking you to do. You just have some early tempo, you play a Viv Vision, and then you have cards that benefit from the Viv Vision, those being Clea in your hand, Sebastian Shaw in your hand, but those same cards also benefit from having an upgraded rings on the board, Clea on the board with the rings, and of course Sebastian Shaw on the board with the rings. It's effectively just redundancy on what this deck was already trying to do. I was pretty impressed with this deck. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, but it was a lot closer to being real now that it has the sort of second enabler that it needs to have. One of the things that really stuck out, though, is that it was kind of difficult sometimes to output power later in games because you were kind of stuck on 3+3 kind of stuff. It wasn't the most unpredictable deck of all time. You'll notice the Legion in here. I was pretty impressed with that guy, too, largely because there are just so many Magic decks, and we are not a very good Merlin deck. But it is possible we could be a Merlin deck. I haven't really figured that out just yet. Largely, the goal here is onboard tempo and then cards that benefit from either Shang on the board with the upgraded rings or Viv Vision in the hand. That allows us to be a very good Clea deck, a very good Sebastian Shaw deck, and just generally have a decent amount of power output in ways people fundamentally are not prepared for in this metagame. Largely, what this deck is doing is just attacking in a way people don't know what's going on. There's a lot of benefit from people just not understanding what your range is. They're very much playing on rails with their show loud stuff. You are not on rails. Nobody really knows what you're doing, so people will snap into you, get Legion, get Cosmode, because why would they expect to have any of those cards? Because they don't know what this deck is. That is definitely helping. But this was actually the best of the decks that I played with Shang-Chi Master of the Rings. I was shockingly impressed with this. It was just shockingly functional for me. This guy's a pretty good card in Thanos lists, I think, especially if you're doing like Thanos Aurora, because the rings are an on reveal and or an end of turn. And if they are an end of turn, Shang-Chi himself is an on reveal. He's just a 3/5 on rate. This is a deck that really wants to curve into Wiccan, so it has a guaranteed 2. You have a million ones and the guaranteed 2, and then you play a 3. It's a very good Wiccan deck. A lot of things going for it in the Thanos context. Frankly, the only thing going against it in the Thanos context is the Thanos part. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if this ended up being like the best version of Thanos. I wouldn't be shocked. It's like a very reasonable thing. Like, I can totally understand. Like, if you want to play Aurora Thanos, I would not be surprised if this ended up being the best way to do it. The problem you run into is you're playing Aurora Thanos, which is fine. It's just not special, right? There are a lot of things that are doing a lot of really powerful amounts of points right now, and you are a little more inconsistent than all of those things, and frankly, also have a little bit lower ceiling. But again, I would not be surprised if this was the best way to play Thanos. Like, it's not an indictment on Shang-Chi here, weirdly. This is actually a case where I'm pretty sure he's making the deck better, but I just think the deck itself isn't all that good. It's very similar to what I said about Thanos Aurora when Aurora came out in the first place, which is like, you know, this Thanos stuff is cool, but it's held back by the fact that it is Thanos, and that fundamental inconsistency and not really the amount of payoff for the power that you want is meaningful. You do feel that. Frankly, the competitive advantage that Thanos has, and frankly has always had, is largely just being a Mockingbird deck, but we aren't in a meta where like a 2/9 is that amazing right now. Like, it's just not really about that. And so we have a lot of power, but not necessarily enough to reliably beat Shou Lao with a Scarlet Spider, right? Or Man Spider. And so we're stuck on like, what are our interactive pieces that we can do anything about that with? And it's like, well, we've got a Red Guardian and then basically nothing else. And sometimes maybe you'll play an Alioth, and it's about what you can't do rather than what you can do. In a world where the point ceiling of the game was lower, this could honestly be a straight up amazing deck. Another attempt to fuse the Shou Lao list with the power that this card brings in the form of Clea synergy comes from Big Baby, which he did play into the top 10. I don't think he's particularly optimistic about the future, but it does strike me as likely the best way to play this new card, in the sense that it is functionally a Shou Lao deck, and then people are going to be like, I get to snap on you, you're a Shang-Chi deck, and you're like, ha, idiot, Maverick Shou Lao. Very viable, but I do think that largely when you compare this one to the Eco one, I find this one a little bit more straightforwardly powerful and probably a little bit easier to play. That's a benefit. I think that it is likely that a deck like this will end up being the best way to play this card in the long or even the short term. I just think that it's hard to say that a lot of that is due to this card. This card does some really cool stuff, but it also makes you less likely to draw your Shou Lao, and that does matter. It's a meaningful downgrade, being less likely to draw the card that is probably the best card in the game right now. And I think that a lot of this card's problems are not that it's not good. It's that if it was any better than this, it would be really ubiquitous. Like, that's sort of the thing that strikes me about this card, is it's quite mediocre right now, but at the same time, I'd be really scared to make it stronger. I'd be terrified to make this card stronger. Because if you, like, let's say you do what I would suggest, and spoiler alert, later in the video, I am going to suggest they do this anyway, but I think it's pretty risky. Let's say you take the rings to like 2-3. Suddenly, this is just like actively an amazing card to have, right? Like, it is just actively, seriously good with major upside, great Clea synergy. Like, there's a world where that is too far. There's a world where making the rings into literally just domino is too good. And that's a really scary thought to have, I think. I still think they should try it because this card is exciting, but this card carries an inherent risk of, like, if it's good enough, it's literally everywhere. And you really don't want that to be true. And it also homogenizes gameplay. If it's good enough, everyone's playing it on turn 2. There's no questions about it. And I think that largely directionally, they got this one correct. They made it so that the base rings was not going to be everywhere when they nerfed it before the card actually came out. For those unaware, we talked about the data mines a little bit earlier. But this is still a card where it's like, maybe you can put some power on the base rings and it won't get to that point. And that is largely what I think they should do. Because again, I really can't stress this enough. Unlike Spider-Man Noir, who I think is probably this card's closest comparison, I actually had fun with this guy, and I climbed. And it's like, I know he's kind of bad, but there's some really scary stuff under the hood of the bad stuff going on here. You know what I mean? Like, this is a, like, beater with an engine. So we can talk about Wiccan, but I think it's first probably better to talk about why Wiccan hasn't been around recently. And there are a couple of reasons for this, but largely the biggest reason is that Wiccan is, and kind of always has been, the good cards pile deck. And with the nerfs to tech cards, a lot of the decks that were keeping other things that would beat Wiccan in check kind of disappeared. What Wiccan was good at was being a mid-range deck that wasn't too reactive and was able to be a proactive mid-range deck in a world where plenty of people were playing reactive mid-range tech decks. Now, Wiccan could also be reactive sometimes, but as the power of combo decks grew and the power of interaction got weaker, and I think especially you'll look at things like the nerf to Fenris Wolf. Remember when we were playing like Fenris Wolf, Merlin, Gladiator as our Wiccan package? My God, that was amazing. But like this kind of stuff got significantly weaker over time, consistently, basically post Merlin, because a lot of metagame shifts that it didn't really have control over occurred, and largely the biggest one would be easily described as an increase in the power of synergy-based decks. This is what I think is the easiest way to describe Marvel Snap as it exists right now. Not just because tech got weaker, that did hurt, but also because synergy decks simply got stronger. Cards like Prodigy were added, and people started figuring out how to use those to make ongoing decks powerful, or Invisible Win for Steps decks powerful. Wiccan is notoriously horrible at dealing with that kind of stuff. Just generally a lot of powerful threats that require answers that Wiccan is usually not able to bring to bear. So what does that mean for like Wiccan as an archetype? It means that Wiccan has to pack answers, and it really doesn't want to be an answers deck. This is the best Wiccan list that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of Wiccan lists that are doing Shang-Chi stuff. I get it. But I also think that I'm not even really necessarily convinced it's better to do this than Domino, because like you're missing a draw to do it, and you're getting a Quicksilver, and you're adding the upside of a 3/5 that turns that rings into like a lot of points. And that's cool. But really, what I think makes this arguably better than Domino, and this is really the only thing, is that it works really well with Superior Spider-Man. And if you are going to be a Fang Foom deck, you need a second ramp thing in there. Like, you just can't be only Wiccan allows me to play my 7. I have to be able to play my 7 with something else too. And so Superior Spider-Man goes in here, and then you start to have actually kind of a legitimate thing going on, where it's like, not only do I have Wiccan, I have other ways of accelerating my energy too. I get to cheat with Dragon Lord. I get to do things like I have 8 energy on the final turn of the game. I have a Fang Foom, a Dragon Lord, and a Shadow King in my hand. I play the Shadow King, I play the Dragon Lord, it pulls the Fang Foom. Like, that kind of stuff can happen. I like that this list is leaning as hard as it can into being a synergy deck. That's really what I'm trying to express right now. I think Wiccan is still in the position that it previously was. But if you're going to play one of these weirdo Wiccan decks, and I don't recommend it, I cannot stress it enough. Like, I really think that it is probably medium to try to do this. But if you are going to do it, I think that having a deck that is full of these synergy pieces and really trying to be like in sort of the ramp space, because I think that's probably your biggest competitor if you're a Wiccan deck, is like, why would I do this when I can Electro Blink? What is my upside? And it's like, I guess there kind of isn't one. That's the other thing that's kind of pushed Wiccan down to the bottom. I think that you need some reasons. And I think that this deck is the closest that I've seen to actually giving you some reasons to try it. It is still a Wiccan deck, though. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Largely, I think my review of this new Shang-Chi is that it's probably not worth getting now, but for a bad card, I had a shocking amount of fun with it. Now, I will also say that fun was nearly, I would say 95% localized to playing Clea. This is the greatest Clea card on Earth. If you are a Clea head, this card is your dream. But unfortunately, if you're an anything else head, I think this card ends up coming in reasonably underpowered. As always, I've been KMBest, you have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.